Well, hi there. It's been a while. I've been very busy, and that is part of the problem. Today, I want to share a few thoughts on the law of margin and rest. This is good stuff. Stay with me. This will not be new information for probably anybody watching. It's not new information for me, but there's a difference between knowing something in our head and learning it in our heart, in our cells, in our body. And that's something that I went through very recently. And what I'm talking about is we need to respect the law of margin and rest in our lives. Just like if you're farming land, you have to take care to not overwork or overtax the soil. If you do, you'll end up with no crops or poor crops, and you'll suffer massive loss or hunger or starvation. The law of margin and rest, the way I'm defining it, means there simply has to be enough time, the appropriate amount of time between seasons, between planting and harvesting, and then just plain resting. And resting means we're doing nothing with the soil. We're not tilling it, we're not cultivating it, we're not planting, we're not plowing. We're letting the soil rest. And both are important, margin and rest. In our lives, it looks like this. If you devote all of your waking hours to any one activity, then other activities that are part of the balance of the way God created us to function are suffering. This is why it's such a typical thing to see a man or a woman, I don't want to discriminate here, but the breadwinner of the family, the entrepreneurial person in the family perhaps, you see them giving a disproportionate amount of their time, effort, and energy to the business, to work. And what suffers? Relationships, spiritual fulfillment, community involvement, friends, fun. These things all suffer. Their physical fitness suffers because they've devoted way too much time out of proportion to business and success. Now, on the other side of the equation, many people devote so much time disproportionately to spending time with family. This is going to sound controversial to some of you. You're going to say, well, how can you spend too much time with family? Well, you can. Because God made us to be multidimensional beings, and we have multidimensional facets of our lives. We have our faith, our fitness, our family, our fun. We need fun and recreation. Our finances, friends, and fulfillment. These are all important areas of life that need to be paid attention to. And if you think of them as a wheel, you need to try to keep them as much in balance as possible. Otherwise, the wheel is going to have jagged edges, and it's going to be a rough ride. And it could stop your progress altogether if you devote too much time to the wrong thing or too much time to the right thing. Just devoting too much time to that at the neglect of other areas of life. If you devote too much time to family and finances, but you let your fitness suffer and you die, well, then you have failed to fulfill your potential that God gave you for life. And that means you fail in all the other areas as well. So what do we do about this? And why am I even talking about this? Recently, I just spread myself way too thin. I made far too many commitments, and I was living by a maxim that I repeated often to everybody who would listen. And that was, well, we've got all these opportunities happening in the business. I've got to make hay while the sun shines. Well, that's a good adage. But the thing is, the sun doesn't shine 24 hours a day. There's sunshine, daylight, then there's twilight, then there's evening, then there's night. And those times are meant for things like recreation, family, rest, physical fitness. I was putting all my efforts into making hay, making money, making successful connections and deals and partnerships, and not enough time into the other areas. And ultimately what happened was, what always happens, I suffered in some other area of my life. And in this case, it was my physical health. I was recently at a conference in Redding, California, and I basically physically collapsed. I slept in a 3-day period, 36 hours. And the week that I was in Redding, I slept more hours in that 1 week than I slept in the previous month because I had been getting by on about 4 hours of sleep per night. Totally unhealthy. I knew it in my head, but I felt I could push myself to make hay while the sun shines. And what I learned through, I believe, God's intervention, I believe he just put his hand on me and said, son, you need to rest, so sleep. So I went to Reading. I spoke at the conference. My talk was very well received. people were blessed. I was blessed more than they were. And then God put me to sleep and made me rest. And I'm rejuvenated, revived, restored. And I'm not likely to forget anytime soon the lesson that I learned about I need to make sure I build in margin and rest into my schedule as principles, not as good ideas that I can do when it's handy, but as principles that are bedrock that must not be violated, or other areas of my life, like my physical health, will suffer. Not only does your physical health suffer when you neglect margin and rest, your mental health suffers as well, because every problem seems to get bigger, every drama seems to get more dramatic. It's just a no-win proposition if you allow yourself to skip margin and rest. There's a great book about this subject. I'll link to it in the notes below. It's called Rest. The author's last name is Pang, P-A-N-G. It's a fantastic book. I highly recommend you read. And there's another book by, I believe it's Dick Svenson. I'll also link to that book. It's called Margin, and you should check that book out as well if you want to know more about the science, the psychology behind the need for margin and rest in your life, and how that makes you more productive, more profitable, and more sane, more happy, more joyful. So that's my lesson for today. Margin and rest, they're important. I know you know it in your head, but have you learned it in your body? Do you know it in your heart? I pray that you do. I pray that you will. And I pray that you don't have to do it the way I did it, by pushing yourself to the verge of physical collapse. Not recommended as a method, so that's why I'm sharing it with you. I'm going to get back to work, but only for the period of the day that's designated for work, because later I have time for margin, rest, fitness, and family time. And I hope you do too. God bless. Until next time, I pray that you enjoy long life and prosperity. Peace to you, and peace to your house.